Alrighty, welcome to Romera Records virtual cast. Today we have on Haley Shapley. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks so much for having me on.
Now, you do a couple things here and there. You're not too busy. No, I'm just playing.
Not busy at all. I just nap and eat and yeah, no.
I was reading so I found you on Podmatch. I usually like to tell people how I found you, and yeah, you do a lot in the fitness world. So if we could just, I guess, give us a quick synopsis of all the stuff that you do, and we'll start from there.
Sure. Well, the biggest thing that I've done is write a book called Strong Like Her, a celebration of rule breakers, history makers, and unstoppable athletes. And it's a cultural history about women and physical strength that just looks at how our ideas about muscularity have evolved over time. I start in ancient times and I go all the way through today, looking at, like the ancient women warriors to the women in the 1800s who were walking on the pedestrian tracks to the early 1900s circus performers, to the ladies of Muscle Beach in the 1930s and 40s, to the women who were trying to run marathons in the 70s or 60s, to the first bodybuilders and powerlifters in the 1970s, and then all the way through today, and everyone who now plays softball and runs track and plays soccer and all of those different sports. So I really wanted to look at how our ideas about strong women have evolved. In addition to that, I am a freelance journalist. I have written for many different publications over the years. I was a travel writer for a long time, so I've traveled to many countries, to 6 of 7 continents on assignment. And I'm also a certified group fitness instructor and just stay busy doing all those things.
As I said, you do nothing, so
I do nothing.
super boring. So, okay, so let's start with obviously. I probably know some reasons why you chose, fitness and women as a book and as a career to talk about, but why was that important to you? I mean, you could have talked about fit chimpanzees. You could have talked about dogs being fit. Why specifically did you feel like it was important for people to know about these kind of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe my next book will be about fit chimpanzees, maybe you've just given me my next great idea. Um, but for me, it was really a great combination of my personal and professional interests. And I think when you're writing a book, it needs to be something that you're really passionate about, or else it's going to be quite a slog because writing a book is a real process, particularly if you go the traditionally published path, which is what I did. My book was published by Simon and Schuster, and you have to get an agent. Your agent has to sell that book to a publisher. You have to write it. You have to go through just this long process. It takes a different amount of time for everyone, but it takes a long time, even on a short timeline, for a book to come to fruition. So for me, this was really a great combination of things that I cared about. And I think the reason that I cared about them is because when I was growing up, I played a lot of sports. Basketball was my main sport, but I was also a swimmer from a really young age and swam competitively in high school. I played varsity tennis. I ran track when I was in junior high. I did a lot of things, but I never really focused on my strength. I thought about things like being faster and more agile, and definitely I wanted to be smaller, but I never really wanted to be bigger and stronger. And I think that's just a product of when I grew up in the 80s and 90s. We did not focus on that. It was like very much the era of step aerobics and Jane Fonda and leotards and really thin models. And just this idea of being small was big back then. So I found that I started strength training around probably like 2014, 2015. And it really changed my ideas of what I was capable of, and even of what I thought I wanted my body to look like or what my body could look like. And I started to think about those cultural norms and how they're defined and where they come from and why my ideas were the way that they were. And so I started to, to think about all of those things. And then I trained for a bodybuilding show. And that is when I really started to get comments like, um, don't get too big because men don't like that, or make sure that you don't hurt yourself by lifting too heavy. And it was really interesting to me because people were suddenly very interested in my, my hobbies and like how that was going to relate to my relationship with men. And I felt like everywhere I looked, I was seeing women who were strong in the spotlight. I was seeing women who were powerlifting, women who were entering strong woman competitions, killing it in CrossFit, competing on American Ninja Warrior, and just, crushing the course and all of these different things. And so I started to wonder how that had evolved and whether there had been other points in history where women had been strong and that had been admired, or whether we had been kind of slowly working our way up to that point. So I think I saw this opportunity to cover women and strength in a way that I hadn't seen done before for a mainstream audience. And that's why it was of interest to me.
Now, something that I've always been confused about is, to me, is really like the idea of women just like getting super bulky if they work out. That always confused me on how people thought that, because I used to be a personal trainer, and
Uh-huh.
I would train. I think I train way more females than I train males, but they would always say, I want to work out, but I don't want to get too bulky or whatever. And I'm
Right.
just like, I dare you to get bulky. Like, it's
Yeah.
it's not easy. The For you to assume that that's what's about to happen when you work out with me is hilarious, because if you think it's that easy, why do you need a trainer in the first place?
Right. Right. No, I think that's a really good point. I like to tell a story about my grandma. I told her a few years ago that um, she should do some resistance training because, for older women, particularly, osteoporosis is a real concern. And it's a great idea for everyone to have some resistance training in their regimen, but particularly for older women who are at risk for bone loss. And, her first response was, I don't want to get bulky and look like a bodybuilder. And it's like, look, you're a woman in your 70s. Do you really think you're just going to go out there, you're going to work out a couple of times a week, and you're suddenly just going to be ripped? No, like it doesn't work like that. I wish it worked like that. You would have to work out so intentionally, you would have to really be going for that to happen. Um, and so, yes, the bulky word I think is really important to talk about. And I do have a chapter about sort of body image and what we think about that in the book because it comes up a lot. I think it's less of a concern now than it maybe was in the past when you were training a lot of women, but it's still definitely out there that women don't want to be bulky. I talk about a study in the book that was done in 2009 where women looked at images of celebrities and sort of like rated their body types and what those women looked like. And there was a photo of Jessica Biel who was on the beach wearing a bikini. She was not very big at all, but women like overwhelmingly said she was bulky and that they would rather appear too thin or too fat than to be too muscular. And so that was surprising to me because it was only like a decade ago when I was writing this book that happened. And our ideas about what women look like have changed so much just in that amount of time. I don't think very many people would look at that photo of Jessica Biel today and think that she was bulky because she doesn't even have, she has like some lines in her arms a bit and like she has some vertical lines in her stomach, but she doesn't even have any horizontal separation in her stomach or anything. Like she's really not overtly muscular at all. And so I think our ideas are shifting really quickly in terms of, what we think women can look like or even should look like. And yeah, I do think it's important for women to know that if they start strength training, that doesn't mean they're going to be bulky immediately. And you have some control over that. If at any point you don't like the way that exercise is changing your body, you can pull back on the exercises that are doing something that you would prefer not happen. So I just think it is important for women to know that weights does not automatically mean bulky. But I think even more important than that is, so many times when women get into strength training, I think that they don't worry about that anymore. Like it just isn't a concern. And so it's just getting over that initial hump of being reticent to try it. And then I think once you get into it, you're sort of like, who cares what I look like? I like the feeling that comes from being able to lift heavy weights. I like this power that I have now. I'm more concerned about these other metrics than just like what I aesthetically look like. So I think once women can get past that initial idea that it is going to be something that they don't, that changes their body in a way that they don't like, that it kind of falls away as a concern.
Yeah, and I think America, just because I live in America, I can't say for the rest of the world, but I think we do have an issue of not enough female role models who look, have plenty of muscle. It is like what you were saying. It was big to see small women, either them being shorter or thinner. Sometimes we see taller women who just might have some meat on them that they just aren't as attractive as a skinny female who's tall, because that looks more like a model. So I don't know. It's something that I think is pretty strange that we don't think of a woman who is built well and fit as the ideal female, because it's like, oh, we're afraid that she's gonna be able to take care of herself and and do what she needs, open all the jars she needs. It's something that it feels like if maybe masculinity might be trying to get rid of the notion of that, but I don't want to make it seem like it's all men. You know what I mean? Like that's pushing the narrative. I think that more females are out there that are great examples of how a woman could look. Like the main one I think of all the time is Serena Williams in tennis. Like
Mm-hmm.
she is jacked
Yeah.
and looks beautiful. And she that one time where she wore that cat suit,
Yeah.
and people were like, "Nope, you can't wear it. You're disqualified." And it's like, for what? For looking attractive while she freaking plays her sport? Like, look at beach volleyball. They're wearing basically nothing when they play. So I don't know. I've always thought that was a weird thing.
Yeah, you made a lot of good points there. I think we definitely need a wider range of ideas of what bodies can look like, because they don't look just one way, and no one is going to fit into just one idea of what is attractive. And that's not helpful to anyone, because um, there are so many different ways to be healthy. And so one of the things that in Strong Like Her is I have photographs of 23 modern day athletes in there, that were shot by celebrity photographer Sophie Holland. And they cover a wide range of body types, and the women are from different backgrounds and athletic disciplines. And that was really important for me to show in the book, because there isn't just one way to be strong, and strong doesn't look just one way. In the early 1900s and late 1800s, in the Victorian era, there were multiple definitions of what kind of an attractive woman could look like. And there are issues with some of those, but one of those was like a very robust woman who was tall and kind of like sturdy. And because she could take care of herself, like she could get things done and open jars. And that was one thing that they appreciated and respected. And so we see like a circus star from that time named Sanduina, who was, she was over 200 pounds, and she was, estimates vary, but probably around 6 feet tall. And she was considered extremely attractive, having perfect proportions. She could lift 3 men at a time. She could juggle cannonballs, and like that was considered really cool. And it certainly helped that she had a face that was, that was considered conventionally attractive. That gets people very far in life, no matter what era they belong to. But yeah, I think in recent years we've often had like very narrow definitions of what's attractive, and somebody like Serena Williams, who is kind of outside of that, gets criticized and ridiculed, and for no reason. I talk about how I talk in the book about how other players would say they didn't want to play against her and Venus because they're too muscular. And Chris Evert called them Amazons and said that other women didn't have the raw aggression to compete with them. And a lot of the descriptions applied to them are things like overpowering, overwhelming, pummeling. And I think there's both this idea of body type, like the fact that they're going against the grain, they're wrapped into it, as well as racism, that they are outside the norm in tennis, which was for so long very, very white. So I think, there's a few different things going on there, but just this idea that they're outside the norm of what women are supposed to look like, and how like dainty women are supposed to be, and what the women's tennis game was supposed to be like. They brought like aggression and power to the women's game in a way that a lot of other players had not. And that shook up the tennis world, and they took the heat for that. But I think that Serena is getting a lot of admiration now. I hope, just for being an incredible athlete, and for being willing to take those risks, like putting on that cat suit and other things, and saying like, look, I'm unapologetically me. I'm showing up. I'm happy about my muscles. I'm glad that I'm strong, and I'm not going to back down.
So something that's a little different, but I think is still on the topic, is somebody who wasn't super fit, but ended up losing some weight, and I think she looks better. Is Adele. I don't know if you're abrupt to this story, but like a lot of people were upset when Adele got fitter, and it's like that's crazy to me. Do you feel like when you're doing your deep dive into this book, and you're collecting your stories and your narrative behind it, did you feel like you could reach females who are out of shape and might be afraid of getting in shape because they're part of this a certain mindset? If it seemed like people who were happy with Adele being big and were upset when she got fit might not have appreciated, because it's like they felt happy being big as well, is what I would assume. I wouldn't assume a thinner person was upset with her getting thin. I would assume it's bigger people were upset that she changed. Do you feel like this book was able to target people with that mindset of, hey, it's fine. It's okay to get in shape. It's okay to look fit and to turn, your fat into muscle, and you don't have to worry about criticism or anything like that?
That's a good question. I think, in the book, I'm not trying to convince anyone really of anything in terms of what they should want to do. So I'm just trying to present the history to them, and let them know who are the women who have come before, who have made it possible for us to strength train today, because that was not something that was always possible. So I think strength training is cool. I think it's worth a go for everyone to try it, but I don't consider it my job through this book to convince anyone to do it. So, if they are happy not strength training, then I am happy for them, I guess. But um, I do think that just in general, no matter what you're trying to do, there are often people who will um, not hold you back, but sort of not support you if you're doing something that is not what they are doing.
Mm,
So if you are working out more and the people around you don't work out, they're probably not going to be supportive of that because they want you to stay the same. They want you to be like them. And um, I think that's a natural human thing, like um, to want to surround yourself with people who are like-minded. Um, so I think you have to consider whenever you have a goal that might be outside the norm of your social circle, that if you feel confident in what you're doing and if you have good reasons for doing it and know what your purpose and motivation is, it's worth pushing past some criticism or doubts that you might get from the people around you because they are coming at it from a different place and they don't understand the journey that you're on. So if you want to start strength training, um, I think one good thing, you were talking about how there aren't enough women who are role models who are really muscular. And I think one good thing about social media, despite its many drawbacks, is that it's given us more insight and like more exposure to people who come from all different walks of life and like represent all different kinds of things. So if you're somebody who has never walked into a weight room and seen strong women, you can start following some online and like quickly get acclimatized to what that world looks like. And so I think it's a good place to find people who are inspiring or who are doing something that you want to do, who you can then follow along with. And so I think it's easier now to find role models than like, in the 90s you had TV and like magazines, and where else are you going to find anyone? That's and your own life. And that's pretty much it. So you just saw those images, and now we have a lot more sources that we can pull from.
yeah, and to elaborate on that, because of social media, it's up to you what you see. So if
Yeah.
you are only seeing these tall, skinny females that look like models, or whatever shapely women, then that's you've chosen to see that based off of your following. You were talking about TV and magazines being the only source of seeing females a certain way, and it depended on what they decided to push. If they wanted to push only Pamela Andersons, then that's all you were going to see, and
Yeah.
you were going to feel like that was the standard of what a woman should look like. And that's something that media can control. Like I would say nowadays, people pretty much always talk about like Kylie Jenner and Kim Kardashian as like female bodies and stuff like that. But if that's the type of media you follow, then that's what your mindset is going to be. And if you only follow stuff about CrossFit, then you're going to think, oh, those are the perfect female bodies. Or if you only follow bodybuilding, then you're like, oh, those are perfect female bodies. So it's the times have enabled people to see a female body in the way that they want to see it, compared to just soaking in whatever is shown to them through other outlets of media.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I was a huge magazine reader when I was growing up. And I just remember that there were so few body types shown. Like I felt like I never saw anybody who looked like me. And when I was growing up, like I was a very typical average girl, I was just kind of like right in the middle in terms, I played sports um, and I was pretty healthy, but I wasn't like super tiny. And I didn't even see myself represented. And so now, yes, it depends on like who you follow in terms of who you see. When I was researching this book, I read another book called Lift by Daniel Kunitz, who is a CrossFitter. And he talked about how before he started CrossFitting, like he really liked thin women, that's who he was attracted to. And as he started, and he thought anyone who wasn't thin was kind of like lazy or something. And so as he started to CrossFit, his ideas like expanded about what kind of women he thought were attractive. And he started to realize that like women who put in a lot of effort in the gym, that attracted him in a way that it hadn't before, because now he was just surrounded by more women who, who were pursuing strength and who could do pull-ups and all of those things. And so it changed his ideas. And I think we tend to think our ideas about what's attractive are fixed and like, that they don't change. And they change so quickly. Our ideas about facial attractiveness don't change as much, but our ideas about body attractiveness change a lot. And I think you mentioned Kim Kardashian and Kylie Jenner. They are great examples of that, because 10 years ago, the most common Google search in relation to butts was how to make yours smaller. Now it's how to make it bigger. And a huge part of that is the Kardashians. They are considered a beauty ideal now, beauty standard, for better or for worse, but they have brought like a different look into the limelight. And now more women want bigger booties. And that was not something that in the 2000s and before that very many women wanted.
Yeah. So speaking on, going back in the past, so you talk about female Olympians and different females that have succeeded in sports and athletic events. How how do you think that has changed over time, as in the celebration of women? I think you talked about the first Olympian woman and how she like secretly got in. Do you think that stuff like that is celebrated more now, and has it continuously gotten better, or are we at a peak? How do you feel like it's going?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's, kind of goes hand in hand with what I try to uncover in the book in general. I do talk in the book about the first time that a woman competed in the Olympics, and it was through a loophole. She was a chariot horse racer, but back then the person who drove the chariot was a slave, and the winner was the person who owned the horses.
Mm,
So she was able to win because she owned these winning horses. Because obviously the horses couldn't win the Olympic medal. So she wasn't even allowed, though, to come into the stadium to get her medal, because that was just not allowed back then. But she was very proud of this, and she has an inscription in a temple about how she's the first woman in all of Greece to have won the Olympics. And then, fast forward to the modern day Olympics. In the first ones that women were allowed to compete in, there were just 5 events, I believe, that they could compete in. They had to wear skirts that came down to their ankles, which made it very hard to be good at very many sports, as you can imagine.
yeah.
Just mobility is an issue. In the 1912 Olympics, the US wouldn't even send women to swim because they felt like the swimsuits were not modest enough. So women were not allowed to compete in swimming from the US. And, we just got done watching the Winter Olympics, and in the first Winter Olympics that women could compete in, it was only figure skating, and that was it. They had no other options.
Wow.
So we have come a long way from then. If you look at the 1928 Olympics, it was the first time that women could run the 800 meters. And there was so much press coverage about this race. And for whatever reason, it was incredibly inaccurate, but it talked about how these women collapsed and couldn't even finish the 800, which, by the way, is just 2 times around the track. It is a tough race because it's somewhere in between like a sprint and a longer race. So you have to run pretty hard the whole time, but for like quite a ways.
Yeah.
So it is definitely like a tough race, but they were, the coverage of it was just describing the women in this agony, and like this is too much for them. And the New York Times said it was too great a call on feminine strength. And they actually ended up canceling the 800, and it didn't come back until many decades later. So, uh, our and the women all finished. If any collapsed, it was because they had just run really hard, which is something that happens to people when they run really hard.
Right.
Like it's fine. I'm sure they got back up afterward. It was okay. Um, and so, we look at the Olympics now and we have almost 50% participation. In this most recent Olympics, I think it was 46% of women were participating. And so very close to parity there. And the airtime has really changed too, in terms of like how many women's events are shown. So yeah, I think that we absolutely are moving in the right direction in terms of appreciation for sports. I think that we still see some lagging in like professional sports. So there are still a lot of people who think that the WNBA is not as valuable as the NBA, or that the women's US soccer players should not get paid as much as the men's US soccer players. They just won a settlement, a lawsuit that they've been waging for a long time against US soccer. And they did finally win and got equal pay, because they've been able to prove that they actually generate more revenue than the men in recent years. And they've had a lot of success on the international stage, and they really deserve to be compensated equally. And I think because so many of these sports started in an inequitable place, it seems difficult for people because they haven't been exposed to women's sports as much, and because that initial investment hasn't been made. So there just aren't as many girls and women who play those sports. There aren't as many opportunities to see them playing those sports. And so then it feels like nobody wants to watch them, which is not necessarily true. It's just because there aren't opportunities to do so already. And it's not baked into our culture to watch women playing sports as much. So we've talked about CrossFit a couple of times, but that was founded in the 2000s, and it was founded with equal prize money for men and women at the CrossFit Games, equal airtime. They do the same events with, maybe a weight change in terms of how much they're lifting, but those prizes have been the same since the beginning, and nobody thinks that that is odd because it's always been that way. And so I think if we had that for tennis and golf and basketball and soccer, that we wouldn't be having these conversations today about whether women should be getting prize money that's equal to men, because they would have always started on that foot. And then, they would have had the same amount of time to, to perfect the sports and to get an audience and a fan base and all of that.
Yeah, I never actually thought about that, because that sport started so late after, we as humans have really realized that women can be just as lucrative as far as, bringing in money. It's pretty crazy that, CrossFit has been able to capture an audience and make them realize like, hey, you're going to be just as excited to watch our females as you are going to be our males. And another sport that I think personally that I almost would rather watch the females than the males is UFC fighting. I think every female fight that I have seen, they come out swinging. And as I do appreciate martial arts as an art, and I love to see people, feel each other out and do nice moves, and it's great and all, but it's the money seller is these knockout, drag out fights where people just throwing kicks and punches. Those are the money makers. That's what people come to see. And with female fights, 100% of the time. They come out swinging like they hate each other. They they took each other's boyfriends or something or girlfriends like this. It is those are the best fights. So to me, those are the only two sports that I can think of that really is something that should be at the level of paying the same because of how late they came into the game. I mean, we've had basketball and softball, and these sports have been around for a while, but like UFC is, I mean, it's fairly new. There were other leagues before the UFC,
Yeah.
but it's at the top of its game. You know, it's not like the WNBA where they've been around for a while, and you know now they're at the top. But I think that that's something very interesting that the sports that have been been around for a while, need to look at that and be like, hey, you know, just because these sports are new, it's not like they found some golden, you know, lane for women. It's like people just were already interested.
Right. Yeah. Well, if you look at the WNBA versus the NBA, there's a 50-year difference there. The WNBA has been around for 25 years and the NBA has been around for 75 years. And that's huge. Like
Yeah.
it's only been for a very short amount of time that girls growing up playing basketball have been able to say like I could play this professionally one day. And that matters because you know, if you're putting in that time and effort when you're younger, more people are going to do that if they think that they could potentially play professionally one day. And women also couldn't even play a like full court 5-on-5 game until the 1970s. So it's been like a very short amount of time that women have even been able to play basketball the way that we know it. There used to be rules that regulated how they played, and it put more emphasis on cooperation and teamwork. And so there were rules around like how often you had to pass the ball and whether you could steal it from an opponent, and you know, how long you could have the ball, that type of thing. And you know, so it definitely put women at a disadvantage in terms of being able to get their skill level to where they wanted it to be. But I covered this game that happened in the late 1800s between Stanford and Berkeley, a basketball game that it was sold out. Like people wanted to attend it. They were crowding outside to get in, and only women could attend it because the Berkeley players did not want to sweat in front of men. That was a no.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was this whole thing. But the newspapers covered it in like painstaking detail down to like what their uniforms looked like and the embroidery on them and what their hair looked like. And so there has been an interest in women's sports for a really long time, but shortly after that, Stanford completely discontinued its women's varsity sports program, saying that it had, you know, detrimental effects on the women. And they did not cancel their men's programs. So, you know, and these women, they went on to, you know, they became doctors and nurses and like very high powered successful women. And it's clearly like playing basketball did not actually have a detrimental effect on their lives. So I think, you know, we just see these ideas that surround women's sports and fitness and exertion and all of that. And even if we don't hold those ideas today, they have an effect on how we've gotten here and like where we are in history in terms of being able to play those sports and appreciate those sports and all of that. So I think that's one of the coolest things that I got to explore in the book is just how these like movements that happened before and how these like pioneers who came before us have impacted what we do today and like how we view fitness in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed over time, and it's definitely been, I think, you know, steps forward as we just saw with the soccer team, which I believe definitely should be one of the sports where the women are making just as much as the men because of the amount of like I know female soccer players' names. Like I hardly
Right.
know any male names,
Yeah.
but to know both is a great thing. That to me that lets you know even if and I don't really pay attention to soccer at all. But like when the Olympics comes around, that's when people usually start talking about these athletes. You know, you might not know their names, you know, three years, but you know that fourth year when the Olympics comes around, then you just you start hearing about like Mia Hamm and what was that chick's name? I think it was like um, gosh, what was her name? Rapinoe.
Megan Rapinoe.
Rapino, that's it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like these names, they get brought up in the media and people start talking about them. And whether Rapina was, I think she was getting some slack for stuff that she had did, but who cares? She's in the media. People know who she is, and that's
Yeah.
that's step one is actually, you know, get these people in front of people's faces so that they become household names and people are aware of them. Something that I wanted to bring up was I did a podcast with a female. Her name is Taya, and she is huge into history. And she was telling me about Valkyries. I didn't know. I thought Valkyries were mythical creatures. I didn't like a siren or something like that.
Yeah.
I didn't know they were actual people. What she said was is that basically the Viking women would go on the raids with the men. They weren't just like staying at home and taking care of the house or whatever. They would be sometimes leading the raids over the men. And these were the Valkyries. And when Christianity started taking over, the Viking people, they were changing the story because the Christians were like, women can't be leading raids and being Vikings. So they ended up taking the story of these women that did these great things and they changed it to make them seem like they were mythical creatures. And so that's why, we have Valkyries. You think of like them with wings and being these strong, buff females that, are great fighters, but it all seems like mythical. But no, they were literally just the Vikings that were females that were leading raids and being the commanders instead of just chilling at home doing whatever.
That's super interesting how the sort of history, the telling of it changed based off of the new perspective that was brought. I found something similar with the Amazons. For a long time, people thought that Amazons were mythical, that they were like a figment of the imagination of Greeks back in ancient times. And then some, recent archaeological evidence found that these were real women who were battling. They had scars and like broken and rehealed bones from being in battle. And a lot of the skeletons that they previously thought were all men turned out that, a third of them were actually women who were out there and they were fighting and they were riding horseback and they were wearing pants, which was a pretty big deal at the time because
Yeah.
women did not wear pants. But these women did because they were riding horseback and it's, more convenient to wear pants when you're riding a horse. And, the Greeks had a real like complicated relationship with the Amazons because on one hand, they thought they were disgusting, like they were not what a woman should be. They were not at home and like especially in Athens and all of the city states were, a bit different, but in Athens, women stayed in their homes and you were considered like you should only know your husband and your father, like, or your sons. Like that was it. You should not be acquainted with any other men if you're an Athenian woman. And these Amazon women were obviously very different. They knew a lot of people. They traveled all around, and so the Greeks, on one hand, were like, "That's terrible. What's wrong with these women?" But on the other hand, they were fascinated by them. They were attracted to them. They thought, the pottery at the time, they often show them in a very reverential light. They're sort of like, worshipped them in a way. And so it was this strange push and pull where they're like, oh, you are revolting me, but I'm also like really attracted to that. So it created this interesting dynamic. And so again, for a long time that we thought Amazon women were not real, but it turns out they were.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy that, we the more history that we dig into, we find out about these types of things, and hopefully, in the future, we'll continue to push these types of things. And in the history books, I talk to my wife all the time about how history, and she's always like, "I hated history, but now I'm finding out it's because they didn't ever tell me stuff that I actually wanted to know about."
I relate to that so much. That is part of what motivated me to write this book because, I liked history, but I just remember the stuff about the wars and like the political machinations between men just like dragged on and on. And whenever you got to the parts about the cultural history and like what was actually happening in people's everyday lives, what were they doing for recreation? What were they basically, what were the women doing? Like, what were they doing in the homes? Like, that was so interesting to me. And it was usually just such a short part of each chapter of a history book. And so I just found that I wanted to pull out those sections that of history that you didn't get to read about in your history book, and bring those to life because it does illuminate so much about an era to know what these everyday people were up to.
Yeah, and I think those are the types of things that will empower women to be like, oh, it's not so bad to do this. Because I even think just being entrepreneurial and doing business and being a powerful woman as far as business wise and stuff like that. Sometimes that seems like that, as I said, is not glorified enough to make all women think this is okay. I'm not going to be a stay-at-home mom, and I'm going to do what I want to do. And so that's even though I know a lot you're talking about fitness and everything in the book, but it's again going back to being independent and not needing a man to do whatever else types of extraneous task. You just being fit just means, hey, you can take care of yourself and do what you need to do, and that's a good thing. You should want to be independent because like we were talking about the CrossFit guy, he saw these women doing these athletic things and he's like, oh, now I find that attractive. That's some guys might just find it, figure out that that's what is attractive is a female that can take care of herself and do what she needs to do and doesn't need help all the time with anything.
Right. Well, I think an important point about Strong Like Her is that I do get into how physical strength relates to other types of strength. So I think that all of these things are connected in terms of emotional well-being, social well-being, environmental, physical, all of that. Um, and there's something about being powerful in one of those areas that really lends itself to overall power and well-being. There was a study done a few years ago that found that the overwhelming majority of women who are at the C-suite level of major companies had played sports growing up. It was 96%. And the higher a woman was in her company, the more likely she was to have played sports at a higher level. So many of those women who are at the top of their game in a corporation or who are entrepreneurs were college athletes or high school athletes or were otherwise like out there pushing their athletic potential or doing something else along those lines. And because there is so much crossover there between having that confidence in one area of your life and then being able to apply it in another.
Yeah, and I always tell my wife, I'm like, I think you're most beautiful when you're not wearing makeup and you're just lounging around. Like that shows me that you're calm, you're confident in how you feel and who you are. You don't feel like you have to get dressed up all the time just to make a good impression. Like I would guarantee that most female athletes carry themselves way differently than females that have zero interest in sports is because I feel like when you are, especially a very successful athlete, because they've got this confidence about themselves that they don't feel like the need to impress somebody, or they just are who they are, and they just do what they want to do. um, I think that's something to be said about how much athleticism can help you mentally as well as physically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I interview women in the book who, didn't grow up playing sports, but then they got into powerlifting or some other similar type of strength related activity when they were older. And even if you're not elite, like even if you don't play your sport really well, or even if you can't deadlift 400 pounds or whatever it is, just knowing that you can do something that you didn't think that you could do infuses you with a ton of confidence. So if you never thought that you could squat your body weight and then you work up to it and you do it, like that just gives you so much I don't know, confidence going into your day. And that's not an elite amount to be able to squat by any means, um, but it's not really about that necessarily. It's just about challenging your own ideas of what you think that you can do, and then showing that you can exceed those, and that you can try something that you never thought was for you, and then realize that if you work hard enough, it can be for you.
What are some things that you do in your everyday life that really contributed to the book, that you felt like, oh, me doing this thing is really going to make this book sell, because I know how to relate to it, to push it to people.
Hmm. I That's a good question. I don't know. Like I am always pushing myself outside my comfort zone. I am always trying new things. I hate change. Like I'll be the first one to say, like, I do not like change. I think it's terrible. And thus I make myself change all the time, because I realize that the magic happens when I am outside my comfort zone and when I am doing something that I don't really want to do necessarily. Like I would love to lay on my couch all day and just like watch Netflix, and I'd be happy kind of before I got bored. But you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
so I think, it's not natural for me to promote something. That's not something that I enjoy necessarily. Although I love talking about the book and like all of the topics within it. I don't like selling things. That's not what I enjoy doing. But because I am so passionate about my writing and this message, like it's made me get outside of my comfort zone in order to just to try to get the book into more people's hands. And I think leading up to the book, kind of what set the stage for me being able to write it was as I've mentioned, I like used to play a lot of organized sports, and then I became an adult, and that was much harder to do. So I started to set goals for myself. Like I ran a marathon. I rode my bike from Seattle to Portland, which is 206 miles. I summited Mount Rainier, which is 14,400 feet. And then I signed up for this bodybuilding show, which took a lot of training and time and effort and lifestyle change and all of that. And so I got very used to setting goals that were sort of like just outside of my reach, that I then had to work really diligently toward. And I got to feel the accomplishment when I was able to then see that all that hard work come to fruition. And um, at the end of the journey, and writing a book was sort of similar. Like it was hard work in a different way, but it was a long journey. And it was something I had not done before. Like, I don't know, I love the hashtag try new things. I'm always like trying to try something new with fitness or with anything else. So I think just that mindset of like, I always want to try something new. I always want to push outside of my comfort zone, like set me up well to be able to do this book and now to promote it.
Haley, it's been awesome talking to you about this. I've learned so much, and I think that when people read this book, they're going to feel that from you. You know, that's why I asked that question to see, what people can grab, and that's why I love doing podcasts. Is because when somebody's got something to sell, whether it's a restaurant, their food, or if it's a book, I feel like when people know more about you, it makes them more interested about the thing that you want them to digest. If you could go ahead and give everybody your whether it's socials or website, whatever, and just spill us the beans on that stuff.
All right. You can find me at HaleyShapley.com. I'm on social media on Instagram and Twitter at Haley Shapley. And you can find Strong Like Her wherever books are sold, whether online or from a local indie bookseller near you.
You got an Audible yet?
I do. Yeah. You can listen to it on audiobook, ebook, or the hard copy is very beautiful with the photos and all of that. But I love the audiobook version too. Great to listen to when you're on a run or doing errands and all that.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. And I hope all the best for the book. And if you do another one,
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
no problem. All right. Well, thank you for everybody tuning in, and we'll see you next time.